It's likely that many people in the community association field are unaware of the existence of National Reserve Study standards. Just as the American Bar Association and the American Medical Association provide guidance for lawyers and doctors, these National Reserve Study standards offer guidance for reserve study providers. The collapse of the 40-year-old Champlain Tower South is the perfect example of why these standards needed to be updated. This update helps reserve study professionals plan for a safe and successful future for your association.
Well, thank you, Paige, and hello. This webinar is timely today because in the last week, the industry trade organization CAI, which is the Community Associations Institute, has been promoting the new reserve study standards through email and social media. I was part of that news blitz, speaking to a national audience of high-rise managers in Charlotte last week. Very enjoyable time there. If you don't know what the last reserve study standard said, or what changed, or even that there were National Reserve Study standards, this webinar is for you. In my world, much has changed in the reserve study business in the last 2 years, and these standards reflect the new understanding of our responsibility to the industry. We're still here to guide associations just like yours safely and successfully into the future, making the present less stressful and the future more secure. But there will be some changes in the next reserve studies you see, and I'm here today to give you a heads up about those changes. This is the outline that we're going to follow today, why things changed, what changed, differences to expect, and I'll wrap it up. So let's start out with why things changed. In the beginning, the reserve study standards and the reserve study credential were formed, and that was back in 1998, 25 years ago. And that changed reserve studies from being a cottage industry with a bunch of different consultants doing planning of one sort or another into kind of an organized profession where we had standard terms and definitions, standard calculations, and like I said, the RS credential to be able to designate who knew what they were talking about, who was a committed professional in that industry. But then everything changed June 24th, 2021. And I hope that date stands out in your memory because that was a day that Champlain Tower South tragically collapsed. And in that collapse, taking the lives of 98 people. And that's when the consequence of ignoring or underfunding reserves changed forever. It changed from an industry of guiding the budgets and cash flow associations into realizing that, wow, there's a real responsibility to care for these buildings physically. So that changed the consequences. And we all were aware, I believe, that we're tasking board members to run multi-million-dollar not-for-profit organizations, and we're asking them to do it generally untrained. And for decades, we were moving along, bumping along to the future. But I think we're now get a clear understanding of what could possibly go wrong. And things could go, as we saw, tragically wrong. And not just years, but decades of too many boards across the country kicking the can down the road, saying we'll let the next board worry about this or that or the other thing. And the worst that they were to fear was, oh, well, just another special assessment. And thinking about this slide made me think of the old Mad magazine and their mascot, Alfred E. Newman, who had the phrase, what, me worry? Just living life cavalier, not concerned about the future too much, and just moving along, again, just bumping along forward in the future. And we even have humor that follows the same theme. This is from the gogladly.com website, and it shows a real estate agent showing a couple a home at the Townhome Association and talking about, well, this home is affordable. Rustic architecture, that's very kind. And as you can see, they aren't wasting the HOA dues on funding reserves. The hidden message is the dues here are low because they're not taking care of the place. And that's the beginning of that relationship that we all kind of knew, and maybe it affected property values, maybe it affected the monthly assessments, but that's pretty much as far as we thought it would go. And then there's this association, Aspen Creek. We're disorganized, sloppy, mismanaged, and That's just the way we are. Don't blame us for it. That's our style. And you can see the sign peeling. It's falling apart a little bit on the right side, a little bit of physical deterioration. But again, we hadn't really appreciated the magnitude of what physical deterioration could do when left neglected. And I want to address that for just a moment here. Physical deterioration is real. Mother Nature and Father Time, they really don't care if you're planning or not, because they're going to deteriorate the buildings. They're going to deteriorate everything around us. That's a non-negotiable. It's just going to happen. So deterioration is expensive. Your buildings are expensive. It's ongoing, but the magic word there is it's predictable. So you can at least work with it. It reminds me at my age of a television commercial I used to see long ago about a brand of filters going on automobiles, oil filters, air filters, and the theme there was pay a little now instead of a lot later. The whole idea is that your car is going to deteriorate, and to take good care of it with a Fram brand oil filter, that was going to help make your thousands of dollars of engine, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 engine, last a lot longer now that you have a $20 Fram oil filter. A nice little theme, and making that connection between taking good care of the property, of the asset, and it being a cost-effective choice for you. All right? And again, a connection. When we look backwards, we can see all these little connections that were there. Again, we just hadn't appreciated that it would take so many lives for us to grasp the reality of it. So CAI, National Trade Organization, has a research arm, and they publish periodic papers, scholarly papers on various projects. May be as simple as salary. It may be technology issues, but one that they published in April 2020, it was a multi-year study, was called Breaking Point, Examining Aging Infrastructure in Community Associations. And so they know that the population of condominiums, townhomes, high-rises, HOAs across the country, they're getting older day by day. And they published it April 2020. Many of you may not know about it because March of 2020, the pandemic hit, and that became the big news. But this paper is there. If you want to find it, you can Google CAI Research Foundation and Breaking Point, and you'll be able to download the PDF. It's probably 10 or 12 pages, something like that. But I want to highlight some of its conclusions. Now, remember, this is April 2020, a little over a year before the Champlain Tower South tragedy. And on page 5, again, we all know that the reality is everything deteriorates. But here's an excerpt talking about boards and their attitudes, the choices they make. Arguably, the biggest factors affecting how and when infrastructure damage is addressed are the association board's attitude and perspective. And this survey revealed a wide disparity in board philosophies. Again, untrained boards kind of following their nose to the future. While some boards are proactive and highly transparent with homeowners, the majority, key word there, are reticent to increase assessments or often fail to plan long-term for infrastructure maintenance, I want to say entirely. In postponing inspections, reserve studies, and ultimately complete repairs or renovations, doing the projects themselves, boards often end up facing an exponentially more comprehensive and expensive project in the long run. Basically saying what that Fram oil filter commercial was saying, pay me now or pay me later. And boards focusing on saving money by not raising assessments to the point where they could offset or pay money to do the projects. And in the end, that being a very poor financial decision. So standing all by itself, it's a bad financial decision to not take care of the property. So the conclusion of that document was for a building to age successfully, update reserve study regularly, get fresh information, fund the reserves as recommended, meaning put the cash into reserves that you know you're going to need to spend. Number 3, following on that, spend the reserves as recommended. Do your projects on schedule when they're small. Don't let them get big and expensive. Again, no word there about safety. And number 4, the firm perform the periodic infrastructure inspections by an architect or engineer to get that insight that you need from someone who is a subject matter expert in building structures. Reserve study people are subject matter experts in budgeting and cash flow. And there's a value to infrastructure inspections. And again, this was a little over a year before Champlain Tower South, which opened up an entirely new consequence, and that's life safety. Okay, a little more explaining what's going on here. This is a rough budget profile pie chart of a financially and physically healthy association. 75% of their budget coming in, being set aside to be used for the operating expenses, management, janitorial, utilities, insurance, all those kinds of things, and roughly 25% going towards reserves, transferring from the cash coming in and then just transferring it over to the reserve fund. Now, in our evaluation, in our studies, most associations of all types and sizes and locations need between 15 and 40% of their total budget going to reserves. But makes a nice pie chart just to use a simple number of 25%. So that's a good number. Anyway, that 25% pays for the ongoing deterioration of roofing, painting, asphalt, boilers, elevators, carpeting, pool surfaces, all those kinds of things that deteriorate a little each day, a little each week, a little each month. That's a healthy association. All right. And what we found is all too commonly in our industry, we had treasurers that were doing a good job of paying the same operating expenses, but minimizing the monthly assessments by minimizing the reserve funding. And that reserve fund among those associations was 0 to 10% of the total budget. And those treasurers saying, clever me, look how much we can trim our monthly assessments. And the thinking is those were not real costs. Well, the roof deteriorates, and that's a real cost. Everything else is a real cost. Ongoing deterioration is a real cost. If you don't pay it now, you have to pay it in the future, and you'll have to pay most likely a larger amount. So this is an underfunded association. There's too many associations like this across the country. Again, why things needed to change. It's not yet normal for boards to appropriately fund reserves. So we need to address that flaw in the industry. Now, another thing, it's common in the reserve study industry that we reach out to a subject matter expert. It's not that common that an association gets an engineering or architectural study, a report. When that's done, that informs the reserve study. And that's a great thing. It helps us see some big expenses coming down the road. Again, helping us catch those when they're small, when we can get them done in a timely manner versus waiting too long and all of a sudden the costs just get bigger and bigger. Anyway, the conclusions of those engineering and architectural reports get absorbed into the reserve study for budget and cash flow purposes. And that's a great thing. Except over the years, people have blurred the line between these two very different reports. A lot of people say, I want to get an engineering reserve study. Well, there's no such thing as an engineering reserve study. I happen to be a professional engineer. But for the last 36 years, my specialty, my subject matter expertise, has been that of a reserve specialist. I'm an RS. And there's another credential called a professional reserve analyst. I held that for a few years and then just let my credential lapse because RS was, it said that I was a specialist in this field. A professional engineer or a licensed architect answers to a different set of credentials and higher authority. Conclusions in an engineering report are structural, where reserve study is all budget and cash management. The contents are controlled by engineering and architectural standards, ASTM, things like that. Whereas reserve study is controlled by National Reserve Study standards, which brings us to today. What defines what people like me in the reserve study industry do? Cyclical projects excluded in engineering and architectural reports is, I want to say, too boring for what they do. Regular repainting, resurfacing the pool, changing out the lobby furniture, changing out the carpet. That's trivial for what they're looking at. They're looking for structural things. Yet that's I almost want to say, the bread and butter of what a reserve study is, all those cyclical projects. The engineering and architectural report commonly do intrusive, the tearing things off, or disruptive testing, maybe core samples, whereas a reserve study, those things are outside the scope of a reserve study, not done. Frequency, every 5 or 10 years for an engineering or architectural report. This infrastructure report, less frequent. It's more common that a reserve study needs to be done because everything's changing. The starting balance, the costs, interest and inflation, the priorities of the board, all those kinds of things. And that's good because it's a lot less expensive than a engineering or architectural report. So those are the kind of the factors that brought us to this point in time where we're realizing that these engineering and architectural reports are good things. Boards aren't yet doing the reserve funding effectively as a whole. They're not appreciating that this is a life safety issue now. We saw that very clearly 2 years ago. And so this is why there needed to be some changes in our industry.
At Association Reserves, we make the present less stressful and the future more secure. If you want to join us in this mission, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment down below on what you'd like to see us address in a future video. Let's plan for your best future.